Welcome to episode 5 of Forgotten Recipes of America. Imagine waking up in a tiny, drafty cabin, the cold biting at your fingers, and the only thing standing between you and a long day of hard labor is a humble, homemade breakfast. No fancy ingredients. No modern convenience. Just survival, with flavor. Today, we uncover 16 budget breakfasts that once fueled America's forgotten working class. From the dusty fields to the smoky factories, these meals weren't just food, they were lifelines. And yet, most of them have vanished without a trace. Get ready to taste history. Before frozen waffles and boxed cereals filled grocery aisles, breakfast in low-income American homes was something far simpler and far more soulful. One of the most iconic and forgotten meals of this era was cornmeal mush with molasses, a dish that tells a story of struggle, resilience, and humble ingenuity. Cornmeal mush wasn't just food, it was survival in a pot. Made from just cornmeal, water, and salt, this thick porridge-like dish was a staple across rural households, particularly during the Great Depression and World War II. Cornmeal was cheap, didn't spoil easily, and could be bought in bulk, perfect for families scraping by on a few cents a day. To make it, women would slowly stir yellow cornmeal into boiling salted water, letting it thicken over a low flame. The longer it simmered, the richer and smoother it became. Once ready, it was poured into pans to cool and solidify, eaten hot like porridge in the morning, or sliced and fried in lard for the next day. But what truly made this dish a treasure was the molasses, a dark, sticky syrup left over from refining sugarcane. Molasses was cheaper than honey or maple syrup and packed with iron and flavor. A spoonful drizzled over a hot bowl of mush turned this poor man's breakfast into something comforting, warm, and deeply satisfying. This dish became a cornerstone for Appalachian families, Southern sharecroppers, and Midwestern farmers alike. It was filling, it was frugal, and it was familiar. Today, cornmeal mush with molasses has nearly vanished from American breakfast tables, forgotten in favor of flashier trends. But for the working men of yesterday, this simple bowl was often the only fuel they had to power through a 12-hour shift of backbreaking labor. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real, and it was enough. Following the humble cornmeal mush, another forgotten breakfast that powered working men across America was the Johnny cake. These simple, golden flatbreads were a staple for families who needed a quick, filling meal before heading into long days of labor. Johnny cakes trace their roots back to Native American cuisine and were widely adopted by early settlers. Made primarily from cornmeal, water, and salt, they were cooked on a griddle or flat pan over an open flame, producing a crispy exterior with a soft inside. For many, this was a versatile food, eaten plain, dipped in molasses, or accompanied by scraps of salted pork. Their popularity endured through the 19th and early 20th centuries, especially in New England, the Appalachian Mountains, and the southern states. Because cornmeal was inexpensive and readily available, Johnny cakes became a go-to meal for families surviving tough economic times. During the Great Depression, Johnny cakes remained an affordable source of energy and nutrition, providing working men with the fuel to face backbreaking shifts in factories, mines, and fields. The simplicity of ingredients, no leavening agents or eggs required, meant they were easy to make even when stores were scarce. Interestingly, Johnny cakes were often made in large batches, stored, and reheated to save time during busy mornings. This made them perfect for working families who needed to get out the door quickly. Though overshadowed by modern breakfast favorites today, Johnny cakes are a symbol of American resilience and resourcefulness. Their crispy, hearty texture and slightly sweet flavor from molasses remind us of a time when food was about necessity, community, and survival. In rediscovering Johnny cakes, we honor the strength and spirit of the working families who made these simple breads a cornerstone of their day. Moving on from Johnny cakes, another staple breakfast for America's working men was fried salt pork and gravy, a dish both humble and hearty, designed to deliver maximum energy on a tight budget. Salt pork, heavily salted and cured pork belly, was a common pantry item in low-income households from colonial times well into the early 20th century. It was inexpensive, preserved without refrigeration, and packed with fat and flavor, exactly what working men needed to fuel long hours of physical labor. To prepare, Thin slices of salt pork were fried until crispy, their rendered fat used to create a rich, savory gravy. Leftover or day-old bread would often be soaked in the hot gravy, transforming simple staples into a satisfying meal. This was a far cry from modern breakfasts but offered a high-calorie punch essential for men working on farms, railroads, or in factories. This dish was especially popular in rural areas and industrial towns where hearty, filling breakfasts were non-negotiable. While not glamorous, the fried salt pork and gravy combo was a trusted fuel source that provided warmth and strength against cold mornings and exhausting workdays. Interestingly, because salt pork was so salty, cooks had to be skilled in balancing the flavors, often pairing it with bland starches or vegetables to temper its intensity. This resourcefulness reflected the larger story of low-income American families, making the most out of every ingredient available. Today, fried salt pork and gravy may seem foreign or excessive, but it's a powerful reminder of how working-class Americans survived and thrived through hard times with simple, dependable food. Next up in our journey through America's forgotten breakfasts are hoe cakes, a humble, crispy flatbread that earned its name from an old farming tradition. These simple cakes were cooked on the flat blade of a hoe over an open fire, a practice born out of necessity and resourcefulness among rural laborers. Hoe cakes are made from a basic mixture of cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, sometimes enriched with a little fat when available. Their texture is crispy on the outside and tender inside, making them a perfect accompaniment to other breakfast staples or just enjoyed plain with a drizzle of molasses or butter. Popular in the southern United States, especially among sharecroppers and tenant farmers, hoe cakes were an affordable and filling meal that could be made quickly with minimal ingredients. The cooking method itself reflects the improvisational spirit of low-income families who often lacked traditional kitchen tools. These flatbreads were not just food, they were a symbol of the hardworking men and women who toiled long hours in the fields. Hoe cakes fueled farmers from sunup to sundown, offering energy and comfort during tough times. Over time, the practice of cooking hoe cakes on a hoe blade has mostly disappeared, replaced by modern stoves and pans. However, the recipe and its significance remain a powerful reminder of America's agricultural past and the resilience of those who lived it. Though simple, hoe cakes hold a rich place in American culinary history, a testament to how low-class families made the most of what they had, turning meager ingredients into sustaining meals that supported generations. As we continue our journey into forgotten American breakfasts, one particularly resilient staple emerges: lard bread. Though it might sound plain or unappealing to modern ears, this simple bread was a lifesaver for countless working-class families struggling through economic hardship. Lard bread was made using the most basic ingredients available: flour, water, salt, and lard, which is rendered pork fat. In an era when fresh butter or oil was often scarce or unaffordable, lard was an inexpensive and reliable fat source that added richness and calories to otherwise bland bread dough. This bread was dense, filling, and calorie-rich, perfect for fueling men and women whose days were filled with physical labor, from factory floors to fields and railroads. It was often baked in a basic oven or even an iron skillet, giving it a rustic, hearty crust that could hold up well during long working hours. What makes lard bread particularly fascinating is how it symbolizes both thrift and resilience. Families stretched limited resources to their fullest by using rendered fat from salt pork or other cuts, ensuring nothing went to waste. This economy of ingredients was not only practical but essential during times of economic downturns like the Great Depression or wartime shortages. Lard bread was commonly eaten sliced and buttered, or sometimes dipped in coffee or broth to soften the dense texture. For some, it was paired with the leftover salt pork or hoe cakes, completing a breakfast that was simple, affordable, and sustaining. Though this humble loaf has mostly vanished from modern tables, its history tells a powerful story of survival. It reminds us how low-income families relied on ingenuity and basic staples to nourish themselves and their loved ones, facing adversity with grit and determination. Rediscovering lard bread today is not just about taste. It's about honoring the spirit of those who made the most out of meager ingredients to keep their families fed and strong. From the dust of flour-covered tables to the bubbling sound of hot pots, another essential dish of America's forgotten breakfast table emerges: cornmeal mush. It was one of the simplest, cheapest, and most widespread meals eaten by low-income families across the country for generations. Cornmeal mush was made by slowly cooking cornmeal in boiling water or milk until it thickened into a creamy, porridge-like consistency. It might not sound like much, but for countless working men and their families, it was a warm, filling start to long, demanding days. What made cornmeal mush so appealing to struggling households was its affordability and flexibility. Cornmeal was cheap and shelf-stable, and a single bag could stretch across many meals. Families often sweetened it with molasses, brown sugar, or syrup when they could afford to. On harder days, it was served plain or with a pinch of salt. But the real beauty of cornmeal mush lay in its versatility. Leftovers were poured into pans, allowed to cool, then sliced and fried the next morning, creating a crispy on the outside, soft on the inside dish that added texture and variety to the table. It was known by different names in different parts of the country, like fried mush or grits cake, but its purpose was the same: to nourish with the barest of means. Cornmeal mush was common in Appalachian cabins, southern farmhouses, and even urban tenements. It was eaten by coal miners, lumberjacks, and laborers who needed long-lasting energy. It wasn't just a meal, it was a tool of survival. Today, cornmeal mush rarely appears outside of historical cookbooks, but its legacy remains strong. It represents a time when people made do with what they had, using patience and creativity to turn meager ingredients into something comforting and reliable. Cornmeal mush was more than just breakfast. It was the quiet fuel of America's working backbone, spooned out with care, day after day. Among the most inventive and resourceful forgotten breakfasts of America's past is a dish called scrapple, a name that says it all. Born out of frugality and necessity, scrapple was how low-income families, especially in Pennsylvania Dutch and rural mid-Atlantic communities, transformed leftovers into something hearty and satisfying. Scrapple is a loaf made by boiling pork scraps. Yes, everything from offal to bones, until the broth is rich with flavor. The meat is finely chopped, mixed with cornmeal and spices like sage and black pepper, and then poured into a mold to cool and set. Once firm, it's sliced and pan-fried until crispy on the outside and tender inside. For working-class families with little access to fresh meat or expensive ingredients, scrapple was the perfect way to stretch every last bit of food. Nothing went to waste. What others might discard, these households turned into a protein-packed breakfast staple. Its taste is savory and slightly spicy, and it was often served with eggs or eaten on its own with a dollop of apple butter or syrup. Though the ingredients may seem humble, the care put into making scrapple elevated it to something more than just a leftover loaf. It became a symbol of making the most with the least. Scrapple was particularly popular among farmers, miners, and factory workers. It could be made in large batches, stored for days, and reheated quickly in the mornings before long shifts. For many, it brought comfort, warm, filling, and familiar. Though you won't often see scrapple outside of old cookbooks or regional diners today, it holds a special place in culinary history. It reflects a time when thrift and ingenuity were everyday survival skills, and when flavor came from tradition, not cost. Scrapple reminds us that even the humblest cuts of meat, when treated with care, could nourish families and fuel a nation through its toughest times. As the morning light crept into modest homes, the scent of something warm and sweet often filled the air, especially when apple johnny cake was on the stove. This humble yet heartwarming dish was a Depression-era twist on the classic cornmeal johnny cake, enhanced with one of the few sweet treats many families could afford: apples. Unlike traditional pancakes made with flour, johnny cakes were based on cornmeal, a cheaper, more accessible grain. To make apple johnny cakes, families would grate or dice apples into the cornmeal batter, sometimes adding a bit of milk, egg, or bacon drippings if they had them on hand. The cakes were then spooned onto a hot skillet and cooked until golden brown. The apples didn't just add flavor, they stretched the meal, provided moisture, and offered a touch of sweetness that felt like a luxury during lean times. Whether tart from green apples or mellow from overripe ones, the fruit brought balance and comfort to the dish. Apple Johnny cake was a favorite among low-income households because it required so little, yet delivered so much. It could be made quickly, fed several mouths, and used up older apples that were starting to soften. Topped with a drizzle of syrup, a dab of lard, or eaten plain, it was both a meal and a morale boost. These cakes were often prepared in frontier cabins, tenement kitchens, and mining camps, where families needed breakfast to be fast, cheap, and filling. It became a go-to for mothers trying to make the most out of whatever ingredients they could gather. Though largely forgotten today, Apple Johnny cake stands as a sweet example of how America's past generations turned scarcity into opportunity. It represents the quiet innovation of cooks who measured success not by excess, but by how far they could stretch the basics. A skillet, some cornmeal, and an apple. That's all it took to create a breakfast that warmed both body and soul. Before pancakes became the fluffy stacks we know today, there were slapjacks, the rugged, no-frills cousin that filled the bellies of countless working men and low-income families across early America. With a name that hinted at their simplicity, slapjacks were all about stretching minimal ingredients into maximum nourishment. Slapjacks date back to colonial times and were a staple through the 1800s and into the Great Depression. Made from a basic mix of cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, slapjacks were fried on a hot griddle or skillet, producing a thin, crispy-edged flatbread that was hearty and satisfying. They didn't rise like modern pancakes. Instead, they hugged the pan, forming a rustic golden crust. During hard times, when flour was scarce or expensive, cornmeal was the grain of choice. Cheap, durable, and filling, it became the backbone of many meals, and slapjacks were among the most beloved. When a bit of bacon grease or lard was available, it was added to the batter or used in the pan, giving slapjacks a savory depth and making them feel just a little more special. People would eat them plain, dip them in syrup, or serve them with beans or eggs when available. On some tables, leftover slapjacks were even used as makeshift spoons or wraps for other foods, an example of how nothing was wasted. Slapjacks carried different names across regions: hoe cakes, journey cakes, ash cakes, but the soul of the recipe remained the same: an honest, unfussy food that fed the laboring class. It was a breakfast born not of luxury, but of necessity. Today, slapjacks have faded into obscurity, overshadowed by their more decadent pancake cousins. But in their time, they symbolized the resilience of everyday families, the ingenuity of kitchen survival, and the pride of making do. With every crisp bite, slapjacks told a story, not of wealth, but of wisdom passed from pan to plate. Before boxed cornbread mixes and electric ovens, there was hot water cornbread, a crispy, golden relic of American resourcefulness. This Southern classic was a favorite among impoverished families, especially in rural areas where ingredients were few and cooking fuel was precious. Unlike baked cornbread, hot water cornbread didn't require an oven. All you needed was cornmeal, salt, boiling water, and a hot skillet. The boiling water was mixed directly into the cornmeal to form a thick, moldable dough. Small patties were shaped by hand and dropped into sizzling oil or fat in a cast iron pan. The result? A crunchy exterior with a warm, dense interior, deeply satisfying and incredibly simple. This cornbread variation was especially popular in African American communities and among poor farming families throughout the South. It was cheap to make, quick to cook, and filling enough to serve as the main part of a meal. For those who couldn't afford yeast or eggs, hot water cornbread offered a lifeline, transforming pantry scraps into something hearty and comforting. During the Depression, this cornbread often accompanied stewed greens, beans, or even just a glass of buttermilk. Its texture made it ideal for soaking up sauces or adding a satisfying crunch to an otherwise soft meal. And for breakfast? A leftover patty could be reheated and enjoyed with syrup or molasses, a sweet start to a labor-heavy day. Though it has faded from most modern kitchens, hot water cornbread remains a powerful reminder of how the simplest recipes can carry the richest history. It's a dish born from struggle and sustained by tradition, where every bite whispers a story of perseverance. This wasn't just food, it was strategy. It was love served in a skillet. And for those who made it through hard times, Hot water cornbread was more than just a side dish. It was survival made delicious. In the early 1900s and throughout the Great Depression, bean and bacon hash was a breakfast staple that combined affordability with hearty flavor, a dish that working-class families relied on for strength to face long days. Made from leftover beans and bits of salt pork or bacon, this dish exemplified the art of waste not, want not. Beans were cheap, filling, and packed with protein, while the bacon added savory richness that could elevate even the simplest ingredients. The combination was cooked slowly in a cast-iron skillet, allowing the flavors to meld into a satisfying, slightly crispy hash. This dish's beauty was in its flexibility. Families used whatever beans were available, pinto, navy, or black-eyed peas, and scraps of cured pork that might have been left over from previous meals. On the stove, the beans softened further, absorbing smoky, salty notes from the bacon fat. Bean and bacon hash was more than just food. It was a symbol of resilience. It nourished farmers before heading into fields, factory workers before long shifts, and families trying to stretch their groceries as far as possible. Served alongside cornbread or slapjacks, it made a complete, balanced breakfast that sustained bodies and spirits alike. While this humble hash rarely made it to fancy cookbooks, its legacy lives on in Southern kitchens and traditional American fare. It's a reminder that simple, inexpensive ingredients, prepared with care, can create meals full of warmth and history. In every bite of bean and bacon hash, you taste the echoes of perseverance, how families adapted, reused, and found comfort in tough times. It's not just a meal, it's a story of survival. Before breakfast cereals and toaster pastries filled American kitchens, there was fried cornmeal mush, a forgotten yet ingenious breakfast from the heart of low-income America. Made with nothing more than cornmeal, salt, and water, this humble dish was a staple in rural households that had to stretch their meals across several days. The process began by cooking cornmeal slowly with water until it thickened into a firm, porridge-like consistency, similar to polenta or grits. Once cooled, the mush was poured into a shallow pan and left to set overnight. By morning, it had firmed into a sliceable block that could be cut into thick squares or triangles, then pan-fried in lard or bacon grease until golden and crispy on the outside. The result? A dish that was crisp on the outside, creamy on the inside, and satisfying enough to keep a working man full well into the afternoon. It was often served with a drizzle of molasses or maple syrup, or alongside eggs and preserved meat, depending on what the family had on hand. What made cornmeal mush so valuable wasn't just its affordability, it was its versatility. It could be served hot and soft on day one, then fried up into a whole new dish the next morning. It was reheatable, transportable, and endlessly adaptable, which made it perfect for coal miners, farmers, and mill workers. During the Great Depression and wartime rationing, cornmeal mush became even more common, thanks to government pamphlets promoting cornmeal as a cheap alternative to wheat. It symbolized both thrift and tradition, feeding generations with just a few basic ingredients and a bit of patience. Though it's seldom seen today, fried cornmeal mush stands as a testament to the creativity and resilience of low-income families throughout American history. In every crispy bite was a story of survival, invention, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refused to go hungry. In the kitchens of early Pennsylvania and beyond, scrapple was the ultimate no-waste breakfast. Born from necessity and perfected by frugality, scrapple became a symbol of thrift, tradition, and the hard-working American spirit. Scrapple has its roots in the German-American communities of the 18th and 19th centuries, especially among Pennsylvania Dutch settlers. The concept was simple but brilliant. Take the leftover pork parts, heart, liver, head meat, boil them down, mix the rich broth with cornmeal and spices, and let it set into a loaf. Once firm, the loaf was sliced and fried until crispy on the outside and soft inside. It was affectionately known as everything but the oink, a testament to how nothing from a slaughtered pig went to waste. In times of scarcity, scrapple offered a way to transform otherwise discarded parts into something filling and flavorful. And because it was packed with protein and calories, it became a staple for laborers heading to the fields, factories, or mills. Families often passed down their scrapple recipes like heirlooms. Some added buckwheat for extra texture, while others stirred in onions, sage, or black pepper to give it more bite. The pan-fried slices were typically served with eggs, molasses, or applesauce, creating a satisfying contrast of savory and sweet. Scrapple's unique texture and deep, pork-forward flavor made it a breakfast unlike any other. But it wasn't just about taste, it was about resilience. Scrapple reminded families that even the most overlooked ingredients could be turned into something nourishing. Though modern tastes have moved away from dishes like Scrapple, it still holds a loyal following in pockets of the Mid-Atlantic. In diners from Delaware to central Pennsylvania, you can still find it sizzling on the griddle, a relic of an era where food was respected, resources were stretched, and creativity was the key to survival. Scrapple wasn't just breakfast. It was a philosophy, one of respect, thrift, and making the most of what you had. Long before protein shakes and power bars, working-class families relied on humble, hearty dishes to get through the day. Boiled wheat berries with lard was one such forgotten powerhouse, a meal built from bare-bones ingredients that delivered warmth, calories, and strength. Wheat berries, the entire unprocessed kernels of wheat, were commonly stored in sacks and kept dry in many American households during the early 1900s, especially among farming families. They weren't just a side item, they were the meal itself. In the midst of financial struggle and food scarcity, these grains became a go-to for breakfast when nothing else was left. The preparation was simple. The wheat berries were boiled for hours until tender but still chewy. Once done, a spoonful of lard, often saved from bacon or rendered pork fat, was stirred in to give the dish richness, fat, and flavor. Lard wasn't just a cooking fat in those times, it was a vital source of energy. And for laborers working in fields or factories, those extra calories mattered. The dish had a nutty, earthy flavor, made heartier by the warm lard coating every bite. Some would sprinkle a little salt, or, if they were lucky, stir in leftover gravy or a touch of molasses. But even plain, this meal was filling and reliable. It's important to understand the context. During the Depression or during harsh winters, families had to stretch every last grain. Boiled wheat berries could be made in large batches, served warm, or eaten cold the next day. It was economical, healthy, and sustaining, and it spoke volumes about how Americans used creativity and resourcefulness to keep going through hard times. Today, wheat berries are considered a health food, praised for their fiber and nutrition. But back then, they weren't trendy, they were survival. This was food that asked for no luxury, just fire, water, and patience. And in return, it gave strength to endure another day. In today's world, we might think of toast as a side dish or a quick snack, but in Depression-era America, even a slice of bread could become a meal, if you knew how to stretch it. Enter day-old bread with drippings, a working-class breakfast that turned waste into warmth. This wasn't just any bread. It was yesterday's bread, hardened and dry. Fresh bread was a luxury in many poor households, so families made the most of what they had. Rather than tossing stale slices, they gave them new life by brushing them with meat drippings. What were drippings? Simply the leftover fat and juices collected after roasting or frying meat, usually pork, beef, or chicken. Instead of butter, which was expensive and often unavailable, families saved every last bit of those flavorful fats in jars. When reheated or spread across warm bread, they created something savory, salty, and incredibly filling. The process was simple but genius. A thick slice of stale bread was warmed up, sometimes toasted over open flame, and then coated with drippings. It sizzled slightly, soaking in all that fatty goodness. The result? A crispy, golden crust and a moist, flavorful inside that filled your belly and lingered on your taste buds. In some homes, kids would be sent off to school with just a piece of bread and drippings wrapped in wax paper, and it would keep them going until supper. Others used the meal as a way to honor nothing being wasted. It was a small victory in a world where every scrap counted. Though it might seem meager by today's standards, this meal spoke to something deeper: resilience, thrift, and tradition. Families learned to find flavor in scraps and dignity in simplicity. No recipes were written down. No measurements required. Just a slice of bread, a spoonful of fat, and a determination to make the day count. In the heart of America's hardest days, when the Great Depression choked every household budget and rural kitchens echoed with empty silence, one humble dish quietly sustained working families: coffee soup with stale bread. At first glance, it sounds too bleak to be a meal. A bowl of black coffee, bitter and steaming, poured over chunks of hardened bread that had already lived out its first use, now too tough to chew on its own. But to the families who relied on it, this wasn't just a desperate meal, it was a symbol of survival, a ritual born from resilience. Imagine a 1930s farmhouse kitchen, where children sat quietly as the mother scooped crusty bread into mismatched enamel bowls. She'd pour hot coffee over the top, sometimes laced with a rare spoonful of sugar, and on luckier mornings, a splash of evaporated milk. They didn't call it a treat, but it was warm. It was filling. And for many, it was all they had before a long day of labor. What made this dish truly American was its practicality. Waste nothing. Use everything. Even stale bread, often saved in a tin box, found new life with just a pour of hot liquid. The coffee? Usually made from grounds reused several times over, weak, but still enough to warm your chest and shake off the cold. Some immigrant families had variations of this. In Scandinavian homes, it was called kaffebröd, while in others, it was simply known as coffee sop. But the meaning was universal: make do, hold on, and never waste a crumb. Though this recipe may have faded with prosperity, its story remains etched in American memory. It was never about flavor, it was about making something from nothing. About scraping through with grace, and proving that even the humblest ingredients, when shared with love, could fuel another day. That was coffee soup with stale bread. Simple, and unforgettable.